Hello everyone, welcome to the CEO Club. Today we have another exclusive episode for you. Today we have Sohail from DLA Piper. Sohail, welcome to the CEO Club.
Thank you, Asif. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name's Sohail, and I'm a partner here at DLA Piper. For those of you that don't know DLA Piper, we're a large international law firm, probably one of the largest law firms in the world, and I'm a litigation partner. And litigation basically means when parties are fighting one another, and I'm usually acting for my clients, trying to either defend them or try and sue people. So that's who I am.
And when you say the largest law firm, is that backed by any proof?
So I think it's by our global footprint. So the number of offices that we have, our turnover. So we have about 100 offices around the world. We're in 45 different countries. We're in 6 continents. Globally, I'd say we turn over about 4 to 5 billion a year. So I think that's how we'd probably say we're one of the biggest.
So let's just learn a little bit about yourself and set the context around the journey. Talk to me about your childhood.
So Asif, I'm just a regular guy in the sense that I was born in Bradford, much like you, a kid of the 80s, and come from a very simple, humble background. Dad is kind of a taxi driver. Mum, your traditional sort of desi mum, doesn't speak much English, but my roots are BD3, where I grew up, and then I was blessed with very great parents who really pushed me in terms of education. They were great role models and encouraged me to really focus on education. Went to Bradford Grammar School, where I did my early years, and then from there, alhamdulillah, I managed to go to a good university, and then managed to make it to a law firm like DLA Piper.
MashaAllah. You grew up in Bradford. What kind of things do you remember about growing up in Bradford and what it was then versus what it is now?
So Bradford's always been a city that's been really close to my heart. Great community cohesion that we've always had. There's always been a really nice pull of the city. So alhamdulillah, I've travelled a lot with work. I studied in Oxford. I lived in London. I worked in Dubai. And I travel fairly regularly for work. But the thing that I've always loved about Bradford is the people. There's a warmth. When I am driving home from Leeds to Bradford and I'm going down Leeds Road, it's almost like you're coming home. Seeing people, your own family, your community. So I think the family community cohesion is special to Bradford, which I think other communities and countries don't have.
That's the theme that comes out of a lot of podcasts. We have a lot of Bradford entrepreneurs on, and they always seem to mention, regardless of how much success they achieve or where they go, Bradford always pulls them back.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, people said when I came back to London, why? Why are you coming back to Bradford? I see no reason to. I still do everything I want to do, which is I work for one of the largest law firms in the world. I travel the world. I work in London. I work in Leeds. But I live with family. I live with mum and dad. And to me, there is no greater joy or pleasure than being able to have the best of both worlds. So when I used to live in Dubai, I just felt a bit of emptiness, for example. Being so many miles away from family, for me it was slightly sort of empty, that it made you feel that you had a very work hard, play hard sort of lifestyle, but there was perhaps lacking some substance. And I think Bradford gives you that. You have your friends, you have your family, you have your community, and that always brings you back, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We're trying to push Bradford entrepreneurs, which is why we're really excited to get you on. So you just mentioned your mum and dad there. Your dad was a taxi driver and your mum, was she a stay-at-home mum?
Yeah, so for the early years, my mum was a stay-at-home mum, but so my dad done various businesses, was a hustler. He was someone who, for him, education was really important. So he was first-generation immigrant, came to this country when he was about 12 years old, didn't really speak any English, but amazingly managed to get into Sussex University to do biochemistry at the age of 17 or 18, which is incredible to think about it, that you go to a different country and within 6 years, not only do you learn the language, but you've also managed to do well enough to go to university and then to do a subject like biochemistry. Circumstances meant that he wasn't able to carry on. So he had to get married. So he tried various things. But for him, it was an unfulfilled journey, the academia. So he was very focused on education. And so in the early years, my my dad did whatever he could, whether it was takeaways, whether it was working in factories, whether it was taxis, but predominantly taxis for since the sort of mid '80s onwards. And my mum was a stay-at-home mum up until the time that I was at high school, which is when my mum also then chipped in with work at that stage.
And you just said there that he had a big focus on education. Is that one of the reasons you feel like you went on to achieve everything you did in education?
100%. I think parents are so important in terms of how we end up, the focus that they give you, the push, the role models, and they certainly were the driving factor. Because as children, all you want to do is you want to go outside on the street, you want to play football, you want to play cricket. If you can get away without working, you would do. So you need someone to instill that discipline to keep you focused, and I think that's what my dad, both of my parents actually would do. And I remember, I'm a big cricket fan, and so I would sit back in the days. I don't know if you remember when cricket used to be on the BBC.
Of course.
And I could sit there watching cricket from 10:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening. And my dad used to always say to me that, make sure this is the work that I'm setting you. You need to make sure you do this. By the time I come back, I'm going to check that you've done it. And he would come back from work sometimes and he'd ask me and say, have you been working today? And I'd say, yeah, I have. Dad, I've barely watched anything. And I remember one time he went over to the TV, touched the back of the TV, and it was burning hot. Because I'd been watching cricket since 10:30 in the morning. Pakistan playing England 1996, first test match at Lord's. You could spend the whole day watching it.
I can just about get to 20 overs.
Oh, I'm hardcore. So I'd been watching the entire day. My dad came and touched the back of the TV because we didn't have these slim TVs that we have now. There was those big, the big backs. He touched it and it was burning hot, and he said, "You've been watching the TV since 10:30 this morning." And when you're that age and you're young, you think, he's worked it out. How's he worked this out? And of course, that was true. But that was the sort of discipline that he was trying to instill, which is make sure, education is important, make sure you focus appropriately. And that's one of the reasons why. I also think that, the first university is your mother. And I'm very blessed and fortunate that even though my mum doesn't speak English, even though some might say she's unlettered and uneducated, she's actually the first university for me, and was the reason why I was able to succeed and become educated in so many different ways. Values that she instilled, the discipline that she instilled, but also her hard work, which I look now and I think doesn't go unnoticed. There's this one time I remember I was at Bradford Grammar School, and I was 12 years old, 1997, and I'd been at Bradford Grammar School for about 3-4 years. And it was the year that the Labour Party won the elections, and it was a big result. Tony Blair came in. The Tories had been in power since 1979, but they had been in power since 1992. And I'd only been able to go to Bradford Grammar School because of the assisted places scheme. So this was effectively like a bursary. Gifted children could go to private school, and the government would pay for those children to go to that school. And that's how I was able to, my parents could afford to send me to Bradford Grammar. But
so were you quite academically bright?
Yeah, I think so. Alhamdulillah, I was academically quite gifted. I was quite motivated. I was quite competitive. So I managed to get into Bradford Grammar School quite early on. And then in 1997, I just remember this conversation. It was the night that the Labour Party had beaten the Tories and Tony Blair was coming into power. You're probably too young for this, but it was a year that the Labour Party was coming into power. And I remember my mum and dad talking. And I walked in on them and they thought I didn't hear the conversation, but effectively they were contemplating what they were going to do now with my education, because no longer, the Labour Party was going to scrap the assisted places scheme. So that meant people like me were no longer going to be funded by the government to be in a private school. So the choice was, you either leave or you find some other means to go. Now, my dad was a taxi driver. And back then the fees were, sort of £6,000-7,000 a year, which was a lot of money for, a working class family. And my mum at that time turned around and said, "We're not going to take Sahel out of school. I'm going to work." And my dad looked at her and said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "I will do whatever it takes, but we're not taking him out." I'm going to work so that he doesn't feel anything. And that has epitomized like the sort of sacrifices they made. And so I just remember within weeks, these boxes of screws and metal coming to our house, and she would sit there screwing these screws with rubbers and then sending them back. And for each box that you'd complete, someone would come and take it away, and you might get a couple of pounds or £3 or £4, but it was piecework that she was doing. And initially we thought this is great fun. You know, as kids we were like, Mom, I want to help you. But she was like, no, you focus on education. I'm going to do this. So she would sit there through the night. You know, during the day she'd be doing everything else with the housework, and then through the night she would be working. And then she started working in an onion factory. And the onion factory would be that you'd have this big sort of wheelie bin type container, and she'd be peeling onions throughout the day. And so if you filled an entire container, you'd get about £5. So you're probably talking about 600-700 onions that you would need to peel, and you get a fiver. And when we used to go and collect Mum from the factory, I remember going into the factory, and as soon as you open the doors, the sort of smell would hit you. But also, you know, with onions, if you're cutting one onion in the kitchen, you start tearing up. Imagine going into a factory where there's thousands and thousands of onions. I would walk in and my eyes would be burning, and I would be in tears, streams of tears. And yet my mum was doing this on a daily basis just so that I could stay in that school. So the sacrifices that both of them made for me are unprecedented. And so now when I look and think, you know, people say to me, mashallah, you've done really well, you're in a great position, you're a partner, you work for one of the biggest law firms, you went to a great university. It doesn't tell the real story. You know, we look at the sort of the tip of the iceberg, but we don't look at all of the stuff that's going on underneath, what led to that. So alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful. And so when you ask me that question about why do I come back to Bradford, what brings you back, why do I live with my parents as a 40-year-old man, this is the reason, you know, because I can never fully pay off their debt, because I wouldn't be where I am but for their sacrifices.
What are your thoughts around living with your parents? You said you're 40 years old, you live with your mum and dad. I know there's sometimes a stigma of children living with their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, when you come into work, I used to feel really uncomfortable. When people, initially when I was very junior, if people asked you a question and said, you're still living at home, it's almost this perception of you're a bit of a loser.
There's a stigma.
Or you're a bit of a leech. Why haven't you not left the home? Why are you still living with mum and dad? But I think we have to be proud of us and our culture and our identity. Now, it's not for everyone, because it's not, you know, there may be circumstances which mean you should have your own place. But equally, if it works in terms of your family dynamics, the thing that I think would, for me, is unthinkable is to have parents who are living by themselves. And, you know, having done everything, and I come from a very small family, I come from just me and a brother, that I can't be in a situation where they are completely isolated, especially at a time when they now need us. The idea that, you know, they've raised us, educated us, looked after us all these years, and then they're fending for themselves on their own. And my parents are very respectful. They're very respectful of sort of my wishes and boundaries. So I'm very blessed. It's not as if I'm living there and I feel like a kid living in that house. For me, the most amazing thing is I wake up in the morning and we have these conversations and we talk to each other as a family. And I think if people can have that in their households, then it's something to be embraced. It really enriches things. One of the saddest things was during lockdown when I was hearing about all of these people who were in old age, you know, sort of care homes, and they were suffering from illness. That was really sad to hear, because in our culture and community, I'd like to think that's one thing we should be proud of, rather than be shy about it and say, you know, I'm living with my parents. I should be proud of the fact that we still have that intergenerational living, which I think is quite a nice thing, and we should be proud of.
Of course, it's inspirational. And your mum, her primary reason for getting a job was to fund your education. So how did that happen then? So she funded your education. You went to Bradford Grammar, did you say?
Private grammar school. I was, you know, I was probably the only properly working class child from that generation. And I went when I was very young. I was there were very few Asians at that time.
So when you say really young, what age did you go to Bradford Grammar?
I went when I was 7.
So 7 years old, you go to Bradford Grammar?
So I was there from 7 to 18, and I've seen it change, and I've seen how, you know, obviously now there are much more people, you know, many more people from ethnic minority backgrounds there, you know, from our community that are there. But back then there were hardly any. There were, you know, 2 or 3 kids from Asian families that were in my year. Increasingly, they've become more and more. But it was a nice experience. It was a nice school. But what it did was, I think it helped me, it's really helped me now when I'm working in predominantly sort of non-ethnic minority environments. Being able to interact with people, learning how to interact with different societies and communities. Something I think our people sometimes lack. One of the big fear factors that people have, I think, when they come into the corporate sector or the professional services sector is the idea of, will I fit in? I've had to fit in. I've had to fit in since the age of 7 or 8 years old because that's all I knew. The idea was, you go there, but you are uncompromising on certain things, which are your values and your faith. And so, alhamdulillah, I think that has been very helpful for me and has probably played a large role in why I've been as successful and in the way that I've been as successful as I have been. So going to Oxford then, and then going and working in predominantly white international law firms, because it hasn't felt like an alien thing, because that's what it was like from the age of 7 or 8.
And you just said you had to fit in there. Do you feel like you're making an effort to fit in, or does it come naturally to you now?
Now, it comes very naturally to me. I don't feel like I'm trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And the older you get, I think the more confident you become. And success is probably the thing that leads to confidence. There are people who, sort of look up to me and ask me how I cope, how I've sort of established myself. And I'd like to think that I'm very authentic. I don't think I'm being someone I'm not, because I think that's probably the worst feeling to have. So for me, there are things that are very important to me. My faith is very important to me. My culture, my community is very important to me. I have clear boundaries. I don't come in here thinking I need to behave in a certain way or I need to act in a certain way. I don't drink. I don't smoke or anything of that nature. So I've got very clear boundaries as to what sort of is reflective of me, what shapes me as a person. So I don't fit in now, and what I'd like to think is I've hopefully made it easier, and I'm trying to make it easier for people from similar backgrounds as me to come in and be themselves and really be their authentic selves, so that they don't feel this nervousness walking into a law firm and thinking, I'm not sure I belong here.
And what would you say to our listeners who maybe feel, I don't know if you heard of imposter syndrome, where they go into environments where they're the only ethnic minority individual and they feel out of place. For myself, when I got my first job in recruitment, it was predominantly white, and on an evening on Fridays, everyone would go to the bar, everyone would, they'd close the office at 12 o'clock, let's go drinking. And I always felt like I was out of place because I didn't really drink. But then if you don't drink or you're not going with them, they feel like you're not making an effort. So you're conflicted in your head. Obviously, you've got your core values. You're not going to drink. You've got your religion. But at the same time, it's how do you make an effort with people when they feel like you're not making an effort in those environments?
Yeah, so I've done it for myself personally. I've sort of built up my own mechanism, being very clear in my head who I am and what I want to be. And so I don't think I've suffered from imposter syndrome as much as perhaps others might have, partly because of my upbringing. But still, you always question yourself a little bit. I mean, anybody who says, oh, I went into a law firm at the age of 22, 23, and I felt like I belonged, I'd question them. I'd say, really? So I think there is an element of imposter syndrome. For me, what has worked is understanding, having that, faith, and understanding having a slightly wider understanding about purpose. And I think that if you accept and acknowledge that there are certain things that are out of my hands, if I come into a work environment, I have to try hard, work hard, give it my best shot. If I do well and I'm successful, great. If I'm not, then I have to just accept the decree of God. And I think that is such a liberating feeling, that if you come in and you recognize, I don't need to fit in, I just need to do my best. And if my best is good enough and I'm going to succeed, it will happen. And if it doesn't, maybe this place isn't for me. But you have to be yourself. And in terms of this whole drinking culture, I think it's about finding the balance. You can't come into, I think, a professional environment and say, there are certain things I'm just not going to do or engage with. But it's about knowing what your boundaries are. So I've never touched alcohol in my life. And I've been around predominantly non-Muslims, and I've been networking throughout my entire life with people who are majority non-Muslims. It hasn't hindered me because I feel like there is the drink is a conduit for a conversation for people, and for me, I don't need that drink. I think we need to be confident that we can come into those environments without compromising our values, without compromising our faith, but still we have to understand that unless we engage, that we're not gonna make it easier for other communities to follow through. So what I'd like to think is that if people look at me and say, Sahel comes from Bradford, he looks like me, he comes from the similar backgrounds as my parents, and he's made it, but he hasn't done X, Y, and Z, which are things that I wouldn't want to do. Hopefully they find that inspiring, and people do say that, and so I think it is possible to do, and it's about being true to yourself.
So you go to Bradford Grammar, you get your qualifications from there. Is that to a GCSE level or A level?
A levels.
Okay, so you do A levels in Bradford Grammar. How do you then get into Oxford?
So Oxford's a really interesting journey because personally I didn't think I would ever get into Oxford.
Such a huge achievement.
Because growing up in the 80s, where most people our age, most people in our community barely went to university. And my dad was quite uncompromising again. And he said to me that I'm sending you to private school, I'm investing a lot in you. Nothing less than Oxford or Cambridge will do. And talk about pressure.
He set the standard.
So he thought that was, in some respects, I guess he knew what I was capable of, even when perhaps I doubted myself. I didn't think I would ever get there. But he would always say, anything less than that, and you'll have let me down. So today's generation might say, look, that's too much pressure being imposed on a child. But I think he was just wanting to set the bar high. And it was, for me, it was, alhamdulillah, it was a great achievement for me to go there, to go to that university. But I remember when I was 11 years old and I went for Umrah the first time, and someone told me that when you go and you perform Umrah, the dua that you make, the supplication that you make when you first see the Kaaba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts that dua. So I'd heard this from somewhere. So then when I realized that I was going for Umrah and I'd heard that piece of advice, I thought, right, okay, I'm going to go for something wild. I'm going to make a dua, I'm going to make ask for something that I think is unrealistic. So I was thinking in my head, what shall I ask for? And at the same time, my dad was like, education, education, education. So when I went to do Umrah the first time in 1996, I thought, right, I'm going to just pray to Allah that I go to Oxford. I thought, this is impossible, so let me ask for something that's crazy. And so when I went there, and I remember as well, as you walk in through the mezzanine floor when you're performing, when you walk in through the King Fahd Gate, I was walking through the mezzanine floor. I was actually staring at the Kaaba for a while, but I didn't realize because the cloth of the Kaaba had been removed for cleaning, so it was actually a different color. So I was trying to find the black stone, the black cube that we associate when we think of the Kaaba. Eventually, when I got close, I realized the Kaaba was right in front of me. And I was so gutted and I was so upset because I thought, I've missed my shot, because I thought you've got to make the dua that as soon as you see it, without blinking, the first dua. And that's what I've been preparing myself as a little 11-year-old kid. So I was so disappointed, but I still made that dua, almost thinking this is now not going to be accepted. I've missed my chance. And it was only years later, about 10 years ago, when I was thinking back, and I performed Hajj and I performed Umrah a few times. But when I went for Hajj and I was thinking to myself, which dua do I want to make now? That I remembered the dua I made in 1996 at that time, which felt crazy, which felt like you will never get that. So that's why I made a very impossible sounding dua in my eyes. So for me, that was a miracle, and I attribute my ability to go there for someone who's from Bradford, working class background. Mum doesn't speak English. Dad is a taxi driver. Some people like me, in that time, in that generation, don't go to Oxford, and so I attribute it down to faith, and I attribute it down to parents and their hard work and their duas as well, ultimately.
Wow. And what was your experience like as a young child going to Umrah for the first time?
It was amazing, incredible. Alhamdulillah, I've been blessed now that I perform Umrah fairly regularly. When I'm in Saudi or the Middle East generally, I can't go to the Middle East and not perform Umrah these days. So I've done it twice this year already when I've been out. And it always reminds me of the very first time I went. And the experience was incredible. We came from a very sort of humble background, as I've said. We had at that time a hotel that Dad booked, which was probably half a mile to a mile away from the Haram, and we would walk 5 times, and it was a killer. And we were staying in hotels which didn't have a lift because that's all we could afford. But I still yearn back to that sort of the fond memories that I have with me and Dad walking through the Haram, feeding the pigeons that they used to have there that used to congregate. And it brings back so many beautiful memories because most times that I've been now in the last 2 or 3 years, I've always been alone. So when I perform my Hajj, I went alone. When I perform Umrah, I tend to go alone. And I always end up thinking back about those beautiful fond memories of the first time that I went with my dad. And alhamdulillah, my parents are still alive. And these days, obviously, if I'm going, I'm blessed to be able to now stay in really nice hotels, very close to the Haram because I want it to be convenient. And my desire really is now to go back with my parents, but do it in a lovely way where we can do it together. And inshallah, that's on the to-do list for me.
Inshallah, that happens very soon. So your dua came true then. You ended up in Oxford. What was that experience like?
That was a life-changing experience. We live in a bubble in Bradford, and we sometimes don't realize there's a whole world out there. And I learned so much when I went to university. My very first day in Oxford was crazy because I had no idea about college system that they have in Oxford. So I just thought Oxford University, that's just a university, that's where I'm applying. But Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, these are 3 universities where it's a college-based system. So you actually have to choose which college you're going to. Now, I couldn't differentiate between Christchurch College versus Magdalen College versus Balliol versus Corpus Christi. I thought, I've got no idea. And when I was choosing my college, there was one college which said St Edmund Hall, affectionately known as Teddy Hall. I was like, Teddy, that sounds nice and friendly. I'm just going to go for that. That was literally the basis for applying to Oxford, that particular college. And what I didn't realize it had, it was known as being a very southern college. It was known for being a great rugby college. I hated rugby. I was too weak. I would always get battered at school playing rugby, and we were a really good rugby school. We used to win the Daily Mail Cup. We used to have players who went on to play for England, like Charlie Hodgson went on to play for England, and I was terrible. I was a skinny kid who would just get battered all the time. So I didn't like rugby, and then it had a big drinking culture, and I didn't drink. So the first day I went to my college, went to Oxford, Mum and Dad dropped me off, they got in their car, they drove off, and I walk into to work out where's everyone going. Everyone's descending on the college bar. So I walk in through the college bar, and someone just hands me a pint of beer and says, Sahil, down this. And I was like, I don't drink. But I said it in a Bradford accent, I don't drink. And they looked at me and said, where are you from, young man? I'm from Bradford. And they looked at me and they just thought I was an alien from a different planet. They literally had never come across someone north of the M25 border. So that was a really interesting experience. And my immediate reaction was, I'm not going to fit in here. I've got 3 years of this. I'm going to treat this like a prison. 3 years, get my head down, do this for the sake of my dad, get out, and go back to Bradford where I belong and all my friends are there, because that felt comfortable. That felt like the secure place. Now I was massively out of my comfort zone. But it was the best experience of my life because I realized we're all people, we're all humans. Someone might sound different. They might not look like you. They might not have the same upbringing. But at the end of the day, this is just the way we sound, the way we come across doesn't define us. What defines us as people are our values and our character, how we treat other people. And some of the amazing lifelong friends that I've made are people who don't look like me, who've come from completely different backgrounds. But if there's one thing that I've learned is that don't judge a book by its cover, because my friends are people who are, they range from people who are, from really affluent backgrounds to people who come from really modest backgrounds. I don't differentiate between them They're all the same as long as I get on with them as people. So that was a really interesting experience, and for me that was just a really educational part of my life. And I remember when I used to go to, people used to get food, and we used to go to restaurants. The only thing I'd ever eaten, right, was you'd eat a curry at home. Mum would make roti for lunch, roti for dinner. That was it. Maybe on the odd occasion she'd make, fish and chips at home, or we'd get a doner kebab or a pizza. Those were my boundaries and horizons. And one of the first few weeks that I'd go to university, and the guys would be saying, right, let's go get some food. Right, Sahil, do you want Chinese? I was like, no, I don't. I don't want Chinese. Do you want Thai? No, I don't eat Thai. Do you want sushi? No, I don't eat sushi. Do you want French? Or do you want Mexican? Or what's Mexican? I realized that I'd literally not lived. I had no, my horizons were so narrow. And I think this is also a life lesson, that we have this certain sense of, we will stay in our little bubble. This is what we know, and I don't really want to, everything else is a bit of an unknown, and so I'm not really going to engage with it. But gradually, when I started realizing, well, actually, as long as it's halal, I'll eat it, I'll try it. And I really liked it. Little things like that, I think we have to, it opens your boundaries and your horizons. And for me, it was the biggest sort of life lesson. Made some great friends. It changed as a person fundamentally. And I remember one time coming back at the end of the first year, and I started sounding a bit different, because your accent's so important, and also it defines you. So I'd gone in September 2002 as a Bradford boy, and sounding very much like I was born and raised here, and then by the end of the year, so 10, 12 months of literally being surrounded by and associated with people who were mainly Southern, the way I sounded started to change. And I remember being in a gym, I think it was Classics in Bradford. At the end of the summer, I started getting into the gym. I thought, I need to do something over the summer. And I was using the bench press, literally nothing on the bench press. I had 5 kilos on either side. Doing my little thing, all these big henchmen, floating around in their vests, and thought, let me just go in there, do my stuff. And this guy comes over in the gym, big, heavy lad, and says, bro, how many sets you got left? And I said, I've only got a couple of sets left. He looked at me as in, like, which planet is it? But he looked at me funny, and then just said to, Wakas, come here. Some guy came over, and he goes, say something again. And I was like, what's he talking about? What do you want me to say? I was like, what would you like me to say? He was like, bro, man, this guy sounds like the Queen. And it was, for me, I realized that over the course of 12 months, my accent had changed, and people started looking at me and started thinking, this guy's different. And yet I was the same guy. And I think a lot of people from Bradford, sometimes when we don't get a chance, is because people judge us and think we don't sound like a person who is from London, and therefore I think there can be prejudices and biases that can come. So I've experienced that myself. I still have people who are so shocked till this day who say, oh, bro, you from Bradford? I'm like,
yeah, you're really well spoken, and I think that's one of the things that I want to find out from you is, you don't sound like you're from Bradford. Was that a conscious decision that you made yourself?
No, not at all. So for me, it happened very organically and very naturally. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the Bradford accent, and it's not something that I've ever tried to hide from. And actually, people will say, when I'm with my Bradford friends, I start speaking with a Bradford accent, and yet when I'm speaking at work, for example, my accent might change. For me, it's subconscious. It's not a deliberate thing, but I think we're just a product of the environment that we live in. And if you surround yourself for the majority of the time with people who sound a certain way, you end up sounding like them. That's how accents are formed. But I don't think we should be embarrassed of accents. I think the fundamental point I will go back to, again, to the point that I was alluding to about the people that I met, down south, and the people I met at university and in London, is it's not the accent that defines us. We can all sound completely different, and people across the world, we should embrace the different diversity that we have of people, the way they look, the way they speak, and I'm very anti-prejudice. against people who, who cancel people or who write people off because of the way they speak. That is something that, as I feel as a leader here in our firm, we have to look past. We have to look beyond that and look at people, the substance behind someone, as opposed to the way they may look or sound.
And I think how you present yourself and how well spoken and articulate you are does have a play on your success and the doors and opportunities that open for you. So my question would be, what kind of advice would you give to people maybe that don't have the experience that you've had and are wanting to improve their vocabulary and grammar and the way they speak? Is there any tips that you can give?
So I think the tips I would give for trying to sound better or have a better vocabulary is just to read more. Okay. And to, I'd like to think I'm fairly well read, and being a lawyer, we had to read constantly. And that naturally improves your vocabulary. I think our community, sometimes one of the things that we don't like doing, and it's a bit of a problem now with, I think, the influence of social media, is our attention span is very limited. We want everything very short, very snappy. We are not really inclined towards reading. So I think there's no getting away from the fact that when I was growing up, there was so much emphasis on reading, whether it's good quality newspapers or novels or whatever it might be, just to make sure that you've got that command of the English language, which is so important in whatever job profession you're going to be doing in the professional corporate services sector. It is one of the most important things for us. So it is something I think we should be focusing on.
Did you experience any form of discrimination being from Bradford and being in Oxford, or was it all smooth sailing?
Not really. If I did, I was oblivious to it, and I didn't notice it. So maybe there was, but I was just completely ignorant of the fact that there were these prejudices. And I've always felt that I'm the sort of guy who doesn't like to make excuses. We were a generation that were taught that we have to work twice as hard to achieve the success of perhaps other communities. So my dad always used to say to me that, if all things being equal, you have to make sure that your CV stands out more than your rival. And we have to do that because if you're already from an ethnic minority background, you may be prejudiced against for that very reason. Or if you're from Bradford, there may be a natural prejudice. So work twice as hard. And so I've always tried to use my work ethic as my competitive advantage. And so if I've worked harder than everyone else, that's all I can do. And so I've never tried to use excuses as a way of saying, well, racism, or I've not really had a chance because of the color of my skin. No, I've worked hard, tried my best. Sometimes I've succeeded, sometimes I've failed. But I don't think it's ever been because of the color of my skin that I've failed. What I want to do is make sure that people can be their natural selves, be their authentic selves, so that they don't have to perhaps compromise. That's something I think we need to work on as leaders in corporate organizations. But I've never personally been held back on the back of my skin color or my background. And if I have, then I haven't noticed it.
So what did you study in Oxford?
Very boring. So I'm a lawyer and I studied law.
You studied just one law degree?
Law degree, yeah, and did my law degree for 3 years, did my LPC, and then I was straight working. So I'm not one of these guys who spent years in academia and did masters and PhDs and had a varied background. I knew very early on that I had a few options, whether I was going to be a doctor, whether I was going to be a lawyer, whether I was going to be an accountant or an engineer. So being of that generation in the 1980s and 90s, we weren't given this freedom, or certainly I wasn't given this freedom to say, oh, go and follow your passion by studying geography or art. My parents were very keen on making sure that I studied a subject which would then have a clear end path. And I wasn't very scientific. I wasn't great at numbers. So for me, law was something I found quite exciting. I would watch, these, now you have the equivalent of Suits.
Yep.
And for me, the little that I had seen, I thought law sounds quite interesting. That sounds like something I'd like to do. And I did a lot of public speaking when I was growing up. So I would do national public speaking. I was on the radio from the age of 8. I was on, there used to be this, I don't know if you remember it, but there used to be this radio station called Radio Ramadan or Radio Fast FM. And I was on that radio station from the age of 8. And I used to present children's programs. So I naturally had about 7 or 8 years that I would go on the radio and present. Then I was on cable television. Then I would do public speaking. So I remember doing a speech in the House of Commons in 1993 when I was 9 years old. And you had MPs there, you had members of the House of Lords there. I remember Michael Howard, who was at that time the Home Secretary, being present and doing a speech there. So I knew that of the subjects that I could choose, law was one that I would probably be better suited because of my skill set.
And what were these speeches that you were doing at such a young age?
Various things. So the Radio Ramadan was, a lot of it was around religion. It was around Ramadan, and I was running a children's program. So I would do a small talk, and then we'd have a quiz. The speeches that I would do would vary. So some of them would be political. Some of them would be about community issues that we might be facing, and people wanted to have an articulate speaker. They thought it might be beneficial to have someone who's provides a slightly different perspective. So a range of different sort of subject areas that I would speak about. I remember speaking at Pakistan National Day, and speaking with people from politics. Imran Khan who was at that time a leader of Tehreek-e-Insaf, but wasn't well known. He was there. I remember speaking with other politicians both in this country and abroad. So a variety of subjects.
Mashallah. So you graduate with a law degree at Oxford. How does this then start your career off?
So Oxford is a really amazing place in the sense that when you get there, it's almost like opportunities do fall your way. It's almost like a treadmill that you're on. And so when I was there in my second year at university, I was exposed to various law firms. And I managed to get what's known as a training contract. So it's almost like your training for the first 2 years to become a lawyer. And a number of law firms came calling, so I interviewed at various firms. And eventually I accepted a training with a very large international law firm. And they paid for my LPC, which is the practical course you do after you've done your law degree. So they paid for that. They then also pay you your maintenance for that year that you're going to go. So I think it was about £10,000, which is a lot of money for a student. So when I was 20 years old and someone saying to you, we'll give you a training contract so you have clear visibility that when you when you leave law school, you will have a job, and you'll have a job for 2 years. We're also going to pay for your LPC fees, which were about £10,000. But on top of that, we'll pay your maintenance, your living costs for about £10,000. For me, I was a kid from Bradford, came from a very humble background, and someone's offering me a committed job with training, but also paying for all of this. And I was still at university. I was second year of university, so I didn't have to worry about getting a job. I didn't have to worry about what I would do after university. So I was very grateful in that respect.
Are these opportunities coming to you because you're in Oxford?
I think so. I was applying for what's known as vacation placements, like summer internship programs. But we had law firms coming to Oxford.
Yeah.
Because obviously they want to attract the best talent. So they would do law fairs, and they would sell to us saying, we're a great law firm, and you should consider us. So I would go around looking at various law firms. Didn't really know the difference between law firms. Again, no one in my family or this works in corporate law. The only people that I knew were the high street law firms who would do immigration law or personal injury or family law. So the corporate law element was a complete unknown for me. And I remember when I did my vacation placements, so 2 placements. One was in one law firm, very large, beautiful law firm, and I went in there and they had badminton courts and squash courts and a swimming pool and a canteen that looked like an airport departure lounge. It looked amazing. And it was in Canary Wharf, big tower, and I thought, this is amazing. Never been to a building like this before, and here I am with the opportunity to work for this firm. And I did my summer placement in that firm, and then I did another vacation placement at another law firm, and again that was more in the city, not in Canary Wharf. And lovely office, sleeping pods. So it was like having hotel rooms inside the office, which is actually not a good thing because that basically means, you don't need to go home. You can just sleep in the office and wake up. But the selling point for me was that they had 2 snooker tables, 2 pool tables, and a gymnasium inside in the basement floor. And I was like, this is amazing. I can play pool and snooker for free. So that was the reason I went for that firm out of the two. I can't swim. So I thought the swimming pool at the other law firm doesn't mean anything. This one, snooker table and pool table, I think I can play a bit of pool. So that was how I ended up at that particular law firm. And then during my training, they opened an office in Dubai. And I'd never left the country before. The only time I'd left the country was to go to Pakistan once in sort of 1992 and then to do Umrah in 96. Those were the only 2 experiences I'd had growing up of going abroad. And here I was as a 22, 23-year-old guy, and the law firm was saying to me, there's an opportunity to send a trainee. So I'm not even a qualified lawyer, I'm just a trainee, to go and work in Dubai. And there would be a flat paid for, there would be a company car, and you get an uplift in your salary more than what you're already on just to be in Dubai. And to me, I was thinking, this is crazy. This is heaven. What, you pay me less. I'll go to Dubai. I've never been there because this was around about 2006-07 time. And that was a phenomenal experience. And again, I had the benefit of just suddenly, thinking 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I was in Bradford, never left really the city, with very limited horizons. And here I am now, having gone to university, had a wonderful opportunity to work at a great international law firm. And before I knew it, a year after walking into that law firm, I'm being flown over to Dubai, a lovely apartment overlooking Jumeirah Beach, with a company car at the age of, I don't think I was 25. And this was amazing. I'd never experienced this. And it was a completely alien world. So I was very fortunate. But I do think that good universities and the education is really important because it propels you. And these are the sorts of opportunities that open up. And I remember, again, my dad, when I was growing up, he would say to me, he said, son, I'm going to tell you to work hard. I'm going to be on your case up until you leave school. The moment you leave school and go to university, I will never ask you to work again. So he was a tough master. And for us, come 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock on Eid day, after reading Eid namaz, and after having had Eid lunch with cousins or family, he would say, right, Eid is over now, let's start work. And all my other cousins would be on their bikes, Whalley Drive, going around the block. And I'd be thinking, this is, Dad, it's Eid. Let me just have today off. And he was like, no, Eid is over now. Wow. And now let's start doing some work. But it was that he had this vision and this single-minded determination, which is, I need you to be better than the rest. And I'm going to put so much education on your focus, ultimately for you to have that life that you can then enjoy. And he stuck to his word. And now when I come home late from work, he'll say to me, son, why do you work so hard? And I look at him, I think, the irony that, but he was true to his word, which was, I'm just going to push you up until you leave school. And from that point onwards, I won't need to ask you to work hard because the mindset, the discipline will have become second nature to you.
And how important is education then? Because there's always this debate about education. Just before we close on the education section of the podcast, how important is education to somebody's success? There's always these opinions and conversations around university is not really worth it anymore. It's too expensive. The prices are, you're not really going to get a job. And then there's other conversations and success stories like yourself. You go from Bradford Grammar to Oxford, and then you go on to become a partner at such a successful law firm. So how important is education?
I think education is invaluable. We cannot sort of place enough emphasis on it. Whether you choose to do a particular or embark on a particular career is up to you.
Yeah.
But I was always taught, and I think it's a great philosophy, which is money comes and goes. You could have a really successful business one day, and the next, whether it could be economic recession, it could be very cyclical, something could happen. You look at some of the big businesses in the world. Remember Kodak, growing up, a huge business,
yeah.
And then with the move towards digitalization and tech, all of a sudden, it was unimaginable in our minds at that age, growing up, that a business like that would become not as important or would suffer. Or Nokia phones growing up, the mobile phones, and now no, I don't know who owns a Nokia phone. It's all about iPhones and it's all about Samsungs. So money and businesses, I think, they are very cyclical, and education is something you can't take away from someone. Once you are educated, once you have done a good law degree or a good degree, been to a good university, and you've got the skill set, nobody can ever take that away from you. And even if you, for example, lose a job or you fail at something, you can go again, because the building blocks are there for you to then sort of reinvent yourself. I've seen so many people who, and people who I went to school with, who had fathers who had really good businesses, whether it was restaurants or other forms of retail businesses, and they were flying. And my dad always said to me that, look, businesses are good for now, but actually make sure you've got the education. And then if you want to go into business and use your skill set, that's fine, that's good. And I think we should. Our religion encourages us to be entrepreneurs, but we shouldn't do it at the expense of education. I think education is something that will sustain us, actually make us better in whichever field we go, whether as entrepreneurs, business leaders, etc., etc.
And how much of a competitive advantage is private school versus sort of your state school? So I just went to a normal school, you went to Bradford Grammar, and then you went to Oxford. So what's the difference in terms of individuals that go down that route versus people that maybe don't get the opportunity and maybe go to like a metropolitan university?
Yeah, my view is private schools are not for everyone. If people think that, oh, if you go to private schools, you're guaranteed success, I don't think you are. I know that from firsthand, because there were children in my class. We had the same set of teachers. We had the same curriculum. We went through the same schooling. Some of us ended up at Oxford or Cambridge, and some of the other kids went nowhere. So I don't think just plonking a child and putting him into private school and you think, right, job is done, he's going to be a success, is enough. It's what it depends on aptitude of the child. Not every child is going to be the same. Some will be more academic than others, and I don't think it's fair to force everyone to be academic. I think that the way some children will succeed will be different. They will have different talents, but they may not be in academia. But I think there are some children who will do better in a state school, for example. Where private schools are good is, I think, if you've got a load of gifted children and they want to be moving at a slightly faster pace because they pick some things up more quickly, it may be that environment is better for them, so that they're not being held back perhaps, and that they can work at a slightly faster pace. And it may be that a different environment is better for another child in a state school. But I don't think being in a private school is guaranteed to success, and I don't think it's a disadvantage necessarily to not go there. So I was very fortunate. I think it was the right school for me personally, and I'm very fortunate because I think I was able to excel by virtue of going to a private school. My brother didn't go to a private school, and I think he probably would not have enjoyed the environment and probably wouldn't have succeeded had he gone through that. So I think horses for courses.
Do you know, like top law firms like DLA, when they're looking at two CVs in front of them and they've got one privately educated and they've got one state school, do you think there's some kind of prejudice there, or is it above board and you don't really look at that as a competitive advantage?
I'd like to think, in an ideal world, that we judge each application on its merit.
Right.
I would, if I was looking at two CVs and one was from a private school background, one was from a state school background, I would not prefer the private school application or CV just because it's from a private school background. And I think, I'd like to think, most law firms, most organizations would think the same way. In fact, we place so much emphasis on social mobility that we have to try and factor in the fact that someone may not have had the same opportunities because of their background, because of their status, their wealth, to have gone to private school, and so that should not be the reason that we should favor one over the other. Equally, I don't think we should go too far the other way, where we prejudice against people who've been to private schools over people who've been to state schools, because that's unfair as well. And I sometimes feel that there is a risk that in the day and age that we live in, that we're going to go too far, and that people will think, well, if there's two CVs, I'm going to prefer the one from the state school because, he must, his achievements are better, and we're going to ignore the one from the private school, because that's unfair on the child who's been to the private school. He has not chosen to go there necessarily. It's his parents who've probably made that decision. The ultimate guiding principle has to be, all things being equal, who is the right person for that job, and all forms of prejudice and bias has to be taken away. How you do that, and make sure that you're ensuring that the right person is coming through because they've not had the same opportunities. That is something that I think is quite nuanced and needs to be factored in. And I'd like to think that that's something that firms with the emphasis on diversity and inclusion, with the emphasis on social mobility, are getting better at. But I wouldn't prejudice one over the other.
Do you feel like there's any discrimination when it comes to race, or?
So the statistics would suggest there probably is, because if you look at the people that are working in professional services sector, there is massive underrepresentation of people from ethnic minority backgrounds. I'm the only Muslim Pakistani partner here in our Leeds office. We're a big office. I'd like to think that my partnership will be a stepping stone for others. So we've got a number of young, promising people from ethnic minority backgrounds who, with the right support, hopefully, inshallah, will be the next partners over the next 5-10 years. But is it right that in a city like Leeds, where we are so close to Bradford, Dewsbury, Huddersfield, Halifax, I am the first Pakistani Muslim partner in arguably the largest law firm in the world? No. So we have more to do. The statistics are not great throughout the professional services sector, and we have to understand why that's happening. I don't think that's because of racism, my own personal view. I think it's because we need to create an environment which is more inclusive for the right people to reach the top. And I'm one of the, I lead the diversity and inclusion network here at DLA Piper in our Leeds office. So I'm the partner sponsor, and I sit on the national steering committee. So for me, this is really important. And it became very important for me when I became a partner. So I remember putting up a post in 2020 when I became a partner, and it was just a post to say, I'm very grateful that I've been given this opportunity. I'm very proud, and I want to say, thanks to my parents. And that LinkedIn post got more than 100,000 views, and I got more than 1,000 people wanting to connect with me, and hundreds of messages. And the message that people, the recurring theme was people saying, congratulations, but it's amazing. How did you do it? And I hadn't thought of it in that way. I wasn't thinking that I'm something really remarkable, that my achievement was so special. For me, it was, I've got to work hard, go on a certain trajectory. But that opened my sort of horizons to, there are people who look up to me and think this is the unthinkable that's happened. And when I stopped and stepped back and thought, well, yeah, I can see why. Because there's no one that looks like me that is here. And we are the preeminent law firm, for example, here in Leeds, and also across other law firms and across nationally. So I think it became very important for me to ensure that we had the right infrastructure in place to make people who come into the firm feel like they belong and feel like they can be a success. Yes, diversity and inclusion sometimes I think is a word that's overly used, and people sometimes turn their nose up to it. And one of the challenges that I think people put is, these are just words, right? Is it really that important to our clients, for example? Do our clients really care whether it's a female or whether it's a person from an ethnic minority background that's doing the work? And I'll be honest, I think the answer is, most times, no. They don't care about that on its own. What they care about is making sure that they are getting the best person doing the work for them. The client ultimately wants the best advice. If you're a law firm or if you're a accountancy firm, what you are paying for is the best service, not necessarily to just help another person out. And so we have to ask ourselves, is our system, our infrastructure set up in a way that allows the best to rise to the top? And that's where I think sometimes people fail to understand the benefit of proper diversity and inclusion, which is, there may be people that we are losing, good, talented people that feel disenfranchised or disillusioned by working in a corporate environment because they think, listen, I don't want to go and drink. I don't want to go and network with these guys at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night when I've got to pray and I've got a family, or it's Eid tomorrow, but I can't even tell people, or I can't go read Jummah. It's Friday prayers, but I can't even go because I have to work here. People might do that for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but there comes a point where people start feeling disillusioned and they have other priorities in life. And I think what we as corporate organizations need to do better is create a system that people don't feel that they need to leave part of themselves at home, or that they need to compromise on who they really are, whether it's their faith, whether it's their culture. And that's why I think this is really important. Because if we create that environment where someone comes into work and doesn't feel like I have to be someone else, I have to fake it to be someone else, or I can't pray, or I can't practice my faith, but actually you come in looking forward to being at work, relishing the prospect, then you create an environment where the best stay within your organization, and hopefully you'd like to think the statistics will improve because those people are not just leaving the system and dropping away halfway through and they get to the top. What I'd like to have is a situation where we have more gender balance within the professional services sector. At the moment, I think females are massively underrepresented, particularly Muslim females.
So you say that how many Muslim females are in leadership roles in your organization?
So across the corporate organizations, whether it's law, whether it's financial services, very few. I don't see very many. I think there needs to be more that needs to be done. There's very few visible role models in the top tier. And I think that's where we need to understand why. Are we simply saying that women lawyers or accountants are just not as good as men? Clearly that can't be right. Clearly that's not right. Some of the best lawyers that I've worked for, some of the best lawyers in my team are females. But we need to ensure, are we giving them the right opportunities to reach the top? As a Muslim female lawyer, I need to understand what are the challenges that you're going to face or you are facing that may stop you from reaching the pinnacle of your career. And it may be that she feels as though once she gets married, she has to behave in a certain way, or her roles and responsibilities change because she's now a wife, or she's a mother, or she has duties with her in-laws. And if that means that she cannot then sort of complement the two and be able to do her role as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter-in-law, and work in, for example, a law firm, and she just has to say, well, that's not for me now, we're losing talent. And we need to make sure that we are creating an environment where all people, regardless of race, color, religion, background, are able to succeed or be given the opportunity to succeed. That's the main thing. Whether or not they want this or not. Some people don't want to be partners. Some people don't want to stay in and want to go in-house or don't want to be a housewife, and that's fine. But we at least need to make sure that is their choice and that we've given them the fair opportunity to have a fair crack and to succeed if they want to.
So what was your first job then? Was it the one where they send you on a training program to Dubai, or?
So you do a 2-year training program as a lawyer. So
right.
It's called your training contract. And part of that training was done in Dubai for 6 months.
So you do a training program in Dubai. What was the experience like in Dubai?
Amazing. I'd never been to Dubai. First time, everything was new. Everything was very exciting. It's a city that I'd seen in magazines or on TV. So my first experience of it was mind-blowing. Made some incredible friends. I really, really enjoyed my time out there.
And were you quite young at that? What age?
I think I was about 25.
25 years old. You complete that training program. Are you then staying out in Dubai, or do you move back to the UK?
So I came back to London. So I was still training with the firm headquartered in London. So I stayed there for another 2 or 3 years, worked for a number of different clients in their organizations, so known as a client secondment. So I worked with Barclays Capital in Canary Wharf, which is a nice experience. I worked for Mars, the guys who
Chocolate
produce
bar.
the chocolate bar. So I was doing a lot of the terms and conditions. So, sometimes you look at the back of a chocolate wrapper
Yeah.
and it will say, you can enter into this competition and this is the prize draw that you will. So I was drafting the terms and conditions. So, sometimes when they say you can enter into this prize draw. So that was quite an interesting experience. I was doing a lot of commercial contracts. All of this was really fun, really exciting. I remember doing contracts for Nintendo.
No
They
way.
had the Nintendo Wii. I don't know if you remember that
Yeah, yeah,
advert
of course.
between Sean Wright Phillips and Ian Wright, and it was on TV. So they were playing the Nintendo Wii together as father and son, and I was doing the commercial contract for Nintendo. Chris Tarrant, the guy who was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So this was all really, really exciting stuff. I'd literally just come from an environment where I would see these guys on TV, or I'd read about these companies in the newspaper or on TV, and all of a sudden these are my clients. They're turning to me and they're looking to me for advice. So it was all very, very new and very fun.
And were you working for DLA Piper at that point, or was that a different firm?
No, that was a different firm. And then I stayed in that firm for about 5.5 years, and then I came to DLA in 2011, and that's when I moved back to Bradford. And the reason for coming to DLA was it's the preeminent law firm in Yorkshire, but that does the work that I wanted to do, which was international work. So I didn't feel as if I was compromising in any way, because what I really wanted to do was work on international matters. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to go work with clients in Dubai, where I had been working previously, London, and DLA seemed to me to offer the perfect platform for that geographical network and the client base that I wanted to do work for. So I've been here since 2011.
You got the best of both worlds. Bradford just around the corner, and you get to travel around the world.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, for people that are watching the podcast now and they don't know much about law, but they're interested, can you just explain a little bit about DLA Piper, the firm? You mentioned previously how large it is, but can you just give us a little brief overview of DLA Piper?
Yeah, so we're a corporate commercial law firm, so we don't do high street work. I suspect a lot of us from our backgrounds will probably not have heard of DLA because we wouldn't instruct or have a reason to work with DLA Piper. So I'd never heard of DLA Piper growing up. I hadn't heard of any of these international law firms. Why would we? Because none of my dad was a taxi driver. If we needed a lawyer, you'd go down the road and go to uncle who might have a law firm and ask him for some advice. So I'd never heard of DLA up until I went to university and then started looking at commercial and corporate law firms. So the law that we do is acting largely for companies and big multinational organizations. Our USP is that we would regard ourselves as a properly global law firm, that we have offices around the world. So we are best suited to those clients who have a need in those countries. So if you're a client such as Unilever or a McDonald's, for example, then because you have needs and businesses in each of these countries, all different continents, rather than going to a law firm, an individual law firm that has a presence in the UK only, you will then need another law firm in Brazil and another law firm in America and another law firm in China and Dubai. It makes more sense for you to go to a law firm which matches your footprint, because then you instruct one law firm like DLA Piper, and you know that if I have any need globally, whether it's in China, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Europe, Germany, Spain, I can go straight to DLA. They're my lawyers, and they will deal with all the issues without having to engage a new law firm each time. So as a result of that, our client base is multinational corporations generally. We act for a lot of state-owned enterprises around the world, and that's why perhaps maybe most of our generation and community may not have heard of law firms such as DLA. And we're a full service, so we do whether it's corporate, commercial. I do litigation when companies fight, because I think it's more of the fun stuff, I'd like to think. But we don't do sort of any of the high street stuff. And as I said, in terms of size, we are one of the biggest. It's always, some people will take a different, it's like football clubs, right? Which is the biggest football club in the world? Manchester United will claim that they are, Real Madrid will claim they are. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I'll say, it's us. So it depends. Everyone will have a slightly different spin, whether it's turnover, whether it's profit, whether it's the types of clients that you work for. But we are genuinely a global law firm.
Just to get some figures in there, how many offices and how many countries, and what's the turnover and number of staff?
You're testing me now. Okay, so
You can go estimates.
we've got 95 offices.
95
Yeah,
offices.
so about 100 offices. We're in 45 countries.
Wow.
We're in 6 different continents. And we have a turnover. So this office alone, Leeds, we turn over about 70 million. The UK, I don't know. We turn over probably $1 billion, I think. Maybe less. So my practice is litigation. So across the UK, we probably turn over about 100 million just doing litigation work, just in the UK. So we're a sizable outfit. And then in terms of global turnover, if you exclude the US, we're probably a couple of billion. If you include the US, we're probably about 4 billion. So we're a big business.
And that's the turnover. And is there like an estimated worth of the company then, or?
I don't know.
It's got to be in the billions, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that's just put things into perspective in terms of how large of an organization it is. And for context, the listeners, you've shown me around this Leeds office, and it's beautiful. It's a very large building. You've got huge rooms just for libraries. People can probably just see the library in the video itself. So it's a large organization. You come in at entry level, or what kind of role do you come in at the beginning when you first started in 2011?
So I effectively had to start again because I originally started off life as a finance lawyer. So effectively, I would act. Most of my clients were banks, and I would, when they're trying to do a deal, they're lending money, I would be the guy that would draft the documents, the transactional stuff. And for me, that didn't feel exciting enough. What I really wanted to do was, what I thought law was all about was people fighting with each other, arguing a case. So when I came to DLA in 2011, I used it as an opportunity to change the field that I was practicing in. So I switched to litigation. So I effectively started off as a newly qualified lawyer. So as if I'd just finished my training, even though I'd been working for about 3 years post-qualification. So I started off right from the bottom, you might say. And then I effectively worked my way up. And so in law firms, the structure is you work as an associate, and then broadly, you might move up to senior associate or a managing associate. Then you might move to a legal director or off counsel. Different firms have different names. And then ultimately, the pinnacle is to make it as a partner. And when you make it as a partner, you have a share of the business. You're effectively one of the owners of the business. So I started off right from being an associate all the way to making it as a partner about 4 years ago.
I think at this point, I want to try and figure out your journey in DLA Piper and how you grew from associate to partner. So first thing I want you to just explain to the listeners that might not understand what litigation means. Like, what is litigation?
Litigation just simply means when two parties are in a dispute with each other and they're fighting one another. And so we're trying to find a way. I like to call myself a dispute resolution lawyer.
Right.
Where two parties have a dispute. Let's say you're acting for one company who's entered into a contract with another company, £100 million contract, and then suddenly there's an issue. One party says, you've not done what you were supposed to do under the contract, so I'm going to sue you. Or they might say, you've sold me something, and that what you sold me isn't what I thought it would be. It's a bit like you going into Currys and buying something, and then you realize that what you bought doesn't work, but on a much, much global, national level. And so whenever parties are fighting with each other, we broadly describe that as litigation, and we would act as lawyers. My job is to try and find a resolution for my lawyer, so a solution for that problem. So I'd like to say that we are dispute resolution lawyers working for our clients to try and resolve their problems, their fights, issues that they have with their other counterparties.
And have you got any interesting cases you can mention confidentially at all that you've worked on?
So a lot of the stuff that unfortunately we do is confidential, so we can't really talk about it. A lot of times, most of the cases never actually see the courtroom or get to a courtroom because we'd like to say we put enough pressure on parties, or parties being properly advised will realize that it's too risky to go to court. So let's try and resolve it early on. So a lot of the stuff therefore gets settled, and we enter into these settlement agreements which are confidential. But cases will vary. I'm trying to think of some of the more interesting ones that you might like. I was involved in a case, if you remember Eddie Jordan, who was the Formula One owner. So I
Yeah.
remember acting for Eddie Jordan. He's a really good guy. He had a dispute with his lawyers in relation to the phone hacking scandal. So, yeah, various different types of disputes. I remember going out to Pakistan in 2019 for a potential mandate, for a potential job. That was something that was very exciting. But yeah, there are too many cases to sort of list off, but most of them end up being quite confidential.
And do you get to work on them right from associate? So when you started off in 2011, you're an associate now. Talk to me about your journey from associate and how you grew within this firm. What is it about you that made you get to partner?
So getting to partner requires, I think, certain attributes, and you need to behave in a certain way. Ultimately, if you boil it down to its very basic, in order for you to be, imagine you have a business, and you've grown a business. Why would you make someone a partner of your business? The only reason you would make someone a partner of your business is if you think that they're going to bring some value, they're going to increase the pot, and it's going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've created your business, someone wants to be a partner, but they're not going to bring anything to the table. All they're going to do is take your profits. They're going to take, why would you dilute what you are taking home just to bring someone else and make them a partner? So if you think of it in that way, in order to become a partner, you want to understand, what is this guy going to do if I make him as a partner? Is he going to grow the share of the pie? And ultimately, if he's going to grow the share of the pie, we all benefit, because the brand grows, the business grows, the turnover increases, the profits increase. So the key thing as a partner is to demonstrate your value add and demonstrate that you're going to increase the share of the pie. And that might mean, as a lawyer, which clients work with you, will want to work with you. Is there a sector specialism? Is there something that you do that no one else does, and therefore you can bring in a type of work because people know that, okay, whether it's data privacy, data protection, or whether it's in a certain sector that you have a specialism, and so you want to make that person a partner because you think this will bring more work into the business. It's a bit like, imagine you've got a restaurant and some guy goes, listen, I'm a chef, and there's this new recipe that I've got. If you make me a partner, loads of people are going to come to your restaurant, actually they're going to start eating here. You're going to say, well, fine, that's great for my business, because actually I don't have the recipe, or I don't make this particular type of food. This guy can and does, and therefore I'll bring this chef into my restaurant. My turnover is going to increase, but I'm prepared to share some of my profits with him as well. So that's effectively what you need to do to be a partner.
Sense.
And so what does it take? It means that you need to have a specialism. You need to be good at what you do. And I think the first and foremost bit of advice I would give to anyone is be the very best at what you are. So if you're a commercial lawyer, or a corporate lawyer, or a finance lawyer, or a tax lawyer, an employment lawyer, try and make sure that people have confidence in you and that they want to come to you because they trust your judgment. That's the first thing. And then it's about going to market so that people know who you are. You could be the best lawyer. You could be technically brilliant as a employment lawyer. But if no one actually knows who you are, the work's not going to come in. So as lawyers, you need to be as partners, you need to be more well-rounded. It's understanding I've got to be good at my job, and then I need to have the necessary profile for people to know who I am, so that work comes in. It's marketing, it's branding.
Yeah, marketing and sales.
That's what it is, because unless you've got people know who you are and you have your brand awareness and profile, the work's not going to flow in. And this is where I think sometimes, again, as people from ethnic minority communities, we're a little bit shy and we're a bit reserved. We don't want to put ourselves out there. It's whether it's insecurities, that we think we're not good enough, the idea that we don't want to make a fool of ourselves. My view is that we, as people, from our generation, as I'm second generation immigrant, work ethic has never been our issue, in my view. I was always taught work damn hard. My parents worked damn hard. They work phenomenally hard. That's never an issue. We will put in as many hours as we can, but just working hard is not enough for you to make that jump up. The bit where I think we struggle, people from our community, is how do we then make sure that we are comfortable on stage? How do we make sure that we have a profile and we have the brand to go alongside that so that people know who we are and want to work with us? And that is where I think we probably need to focus more as people from ethnic minority backgrounds and people like myself who recognize that these might be some of the limitations that people have. So what I need to do is, if I see someone who's a brilliant lawyer, who's got great talent, great potential, I need to look at what are the soft skills that this person needs in order to bring the best out of him. Because no one comes out. If someone took me and said, at 22, 23 years old, did you have the right skill set to be a partner? No, I didn't. Of course I didn't. But you learn those skill sets, and over the years, through training, through good mentors, through people who come into your life that you can take advice from. And that's what I think we need to put in place, a program, develop those soft skills, identify gaps and weaknesses for people, give people those visible mentors that they can come to and talk to and say, I'd like to learn from you. What is it that I should be doing? And that's where people like myself and others in the community who have done well have, I think, a real responsibility to give back.
And I think that's exactly what you're doing on this podcast. You're providing gem after gem. So I'm sure there's a lot of young listeners that will benefit from listening to you and taking your advice. So for yourself, did you then basically become an expert at marketing and sales, so you were able to bring a new business to the law firm?
So as I said, one of the things that I learned when I became a partner was just the power of marketing. For example, I mentioned the LinkedIn post I did when I became a partner. Yeah. And I realized how much positive traction that had. But also, when you go out and you're speaking at conferences and you're speaking at events, again, your profile raises. And so I do a lot of public speaking. I speak at a lot of conferences. I get invited to a lot of events. And for me, that's an integral part of my brand and how to raise profile. So people see you as an expert in a subject matter. And if they do, then they're more likely to come to you when they have an issue. And even if they don't need an issue, a lot of times people have reached out to me and said, oh, I've just been forwarded your details as a lawyer. They say they've heard of you. Are you able to help me with this? And that in itself is a form of, wonderful marketing, that it's people know who you are. People have trust in your judgment, in your judgment, and that can generate work itself. So I'd like to think, hopefully I'm good at my job. And I'd like to think that it's always a learning curve. We're never quite the finished article. We can always do more. And I'm learning constantly as well how to continuously improve ourselves and how to make sure that we are genuinely maximizing the potential that we have.
And any advice at this point for listeners that are listening to you, that look up to you, that are inspired by your journey and story, and maybe just graduating or trying to get into the legal field, what kind of steps do you think they should take to get to your level?
So it's a great question, and I get asked that question a lot by young people, and I actually think it's a really difficult time in which to grow up because of the role of social media. There is so much pressure on young people these days because what they see, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok or what they see on LinkedIn, is others doing so well. People earning money at a young age, people driving flash cars, and there can almost be a feeling that I'm unsuccessful, I'm not good enough, I'm falling behind. My advice would be, faith is really important to me. And so whenever I try and whenever I lose perspective or need perspective, I always go back and say, okay, what is it that our faith teaches us? Because our faith is not something you do for 5 minutes every couple of hours or 25 minutes in a day and you go into a room and you pray and you come back. It's not a different part of our life. Our faith is, it's our entire life. We say religion, Islam is a way of life. So it gives you the answers for everything. And so to the young people, I just encourage them, of whatever faith, that there are certain principles that I've learned which I think are really helpful, which is be grateful for what you have. Because when you are grateful, you're always naturally looking at what you have rather than those above you. Because when we're looking at people above us and looking, whether it's on social media, naturally it fuels our insecurities. We just think, I'm not good enough, he's doing so well. This whole imposter syndrome is fueled by this idea that there are others who are better than me. Whereas our religion teaches us, look at those that are less fortunate than you. Look at how much you have and how grateful you should be. So my advice to people would be grateful for who you are and what you have, because you have more than so many other people. Don't look at those above you. Look at them for inspiration, but not necessarily with a view to comparing yourself to them. Hard work. Again, our faith teaches us that the only thing that's in our control is hard work and prayer. If we work hard, the rest you have to just accept. Not everyone is going to achieve the same outcome, the same result when you put in the same shift. We just have to accept that. It immediately liberates you when you accept that I've done what I can, the rest I will leave to the decree of God. Again, so that for me is a really helpful sort of mechanism. I think there are other things in terms of how we are as human beings. So if we integrated them into our lifestyle, you might not necessarily see the reward or the benefit immediately, but I've always felt it comes back later on. So whether it's there are things in terms of our character. We're not supposed to gossip and backbite and talk ill of others. And you might think, okay, well, what's that got to do with being in a corporate environment? But for me, it's leadership. Because the people that have real credibility, the people that have real gravitas, are the ones that are not in by the coffee machine talking, or the water cooler, and talking ill of other people. They rise above that. Leaders are not there talking about idle chat, and yet our faith teaches us we don't talk ill of other people behind their back. And when people see you as not this guy who is backbiting and talking ill of someone, because this guy's a trustworthy guy, he has integrity, he speaks the truth, he treats people fairly, he's just, that in itself makes, in the views of others, you're immediately, whether subliminally or overtly, people will immediately think of you in a certain way. And so I think we should, for young people, I would say come in and be the best version that you can. Be grateful for what you are, give your best shot, work hard, don't engage in negativity or ill talk, and success will naturally be a byproduct of the seeds that you sow. And whatever you become in life, be grateful for it. And again, life is a great humbler. There are so many tests that await us. One day we may be riding the crest of a wave and doing really well, and all of a sudden we have no foresight as to what's coming, whether in 6 months, a year's time, 5 years' time. So humble yourself and help those along the journey, because if we help those along the journey, those people who are now people who are looking up to us may be the people that we need, because they're the ones that are the clients of the future. They may be the ones who run those big businesses. And I always think that if you do good, it comes round. One way or another, it always comes round.
That was very well said. And some key themes that have come out there are religion. You said you went to Hajj and Umrah, and you go quite often, and you're using the elements of religion and implementing them into all areas of your personal life and work life. So how important would you say religion has been and played in your success?
Huge. I put all of my success down to my faith, and also my parents, in terms of their own prayers, and also their hard work and support that they've given me over the years. But faith is really important, because it's not something, again, that is a part of me that I leave at home and come to work. I'd like to think that we can do our jobs whilst being ambassadors of who we are as people, whether as people of faith. And it also provides you, as I've said, it gives you that real strength, for me in particular, real strength in the workplace. When, if there's something that's happening, I've lost a pitch, or I've lost a mandate, or there's something that hasn't quite gone my way, I hold on to my faith, because it tells me the answers are there. One of the things that I've said in meetings when people have taken where I've lost a pitch or I've lost a particular opportunity, is I'm relaxed, because what's written for me will reach me, even if it's beneath a mountain, And what's not meant for me will not reach me, even if it's between my two lips. And when you understand that everything really, is predestined and predetermined by a higher being, as a man of faith, it's very liberating, and that it takes the pressure off. So for me, it's incredibly important. It's it's a toolkit to get through my career, my job, and also to help others as well. Because we talk about what does real success mean? In my mind, real success is not about personal gain, because if you ask yourself what is it that I want in life, and if it's just purely money, at what point does money become enough? What I'm earning now is something I could never have imagined when I was a kid. My first salary as a trainee was more than what my parents were earning or had ever earned. And so if I was a kid thinking, if I just earned what my parents earned or just a bit more, I would be satisfied, that would not be enough. That doesn't give you contentment. Money alone doesn't give you contentment. So it's understanding your purpose. And for me, what religion gives you that wider purpose and perspective, which is what gives real contentment, is your ability to help others, the ability to make an impact, the ability to leave a legacy. These are things that I think give you real contentment and fulfillment. When you take something, it's never as pleasurable as the feeling that you get when you give something to someone. If you give a gift to someone, or someone has come through the ranks because of your support, it's the most fulfilling thing that you can get. And that's not money, and that's not something that you've earned. So I genuinely think that when you understand that there is a higher purpose for us all, as men of faith, it gives you a real understanding as to why we do what we do, and perspective. Because otherwise we can lose that perspective very quickly. I see a lot of people who earn a lot of money in the city, and their lives are still very empty. They've got everything there that they can buy, or celebrities that you can see, but they're yearning that something extra which will give them happiness or contentment, that will just make everything better. But our view is, or my perspective is, that the worldly goods are never going to be enough for you if that's what you're searching. Poverty is between the two eyes of a person. You're always anxious. I believe that God has created us humans as naturally anxious beings. We're always worried. Even when we're doing well, we're worried that what happens if something goes wrong. You can never fully relax and enjoy the moment. But if you are content and you realize, look, this is a journey that I'm going through, there is something else. I'm going from A to B, and I have to behave in a certain way, and I have to navigate the challenges and hurdles and obstacles that might come my way. Ultimately, the end result is because I need to receive my exam results as to whether or not I've passed the tests and challenges in this life. That's why I do what I do. Coming to work for me is an act of worship. Why? Because I'm working, I'm trying to earn a halal income, I'm not trying to harm anyone, I'm trying to be a better influence for other people, but put a halal income before my family. That for me is an act of worship. So it's not something that you separate and say, there's faith, and how is that important to your workplace? Because faith is, my work is my faith.
And what are people like when you, because obviously you showed me around the office, you've got a prayer area, you've got a place you can do your wuzu. What are people like in this law firm when it comes to religion and some of the things that you've implemented?
I'd like to think people feel they can come and of whatever faith, they can be themselves. If you're a Muslim in this office, for example, we have halal food here. So there may just be a handful of people here, but you don't have to compromise on your faith and say, well, I have to go into this workplace and I have to eat vegetarian only because there'll be no halal catering. No. You come here, you don't need to compromise on faith. You don't need to come into this workplace and feel like, oh, well, there's nowhere to pray, or there isn't a proper wudu facility. No. We've got a proper wudu facility, we've got a proper prayer facility separated for men and women as appropriate. So there should be nothing there that stops you from doing what you want to do. And equally, that's true of other faiths. So we have a multi-faith room. So whether you're Jewish, whether you're a Hindu, whether you're a Sikh, whether you're Catholic, you should be able to come here and do what you want to do without feeling as if you're compromising.
So how have you remained so humble and grounded? I know once you achieve success and money comes and you start to get the lifestyle, it can derail a few people and they go off track. So how have you remained so grounded and humble, down to earth, and religious as well? Or have you had your challenges?
Yeah, so I think two reasons. One, I know where I come from, and I'm very proud of where I come from. So as I said, I still live with my parents. I go home, and there's no element of, you're a partner in a law firm. I'm a son. When I go home, my mum will be there, and I get in trouble for still the things that I'll do wrong. She'll tell me off, and my dad is still my boss. He rules the roost, and he is the man of the household. So I'm just a son in that house. So I think having that family environment keeps you humble, and so I'm very grateful of that. But I think also, again, harping it back to faith for me keeps me very humble, because there was a verse in the Quran that I read a few years ago which sent shivers down my spine when I read it. And this was 2015. I still remember dates. I'm weird with dates. 15th of March 2015. And I'd read a verse in the Quran which basically said that, and do you think it will be sufficient for you to say that you believe, and that we will not test you with something, be it loss of wealth, health, or your children? And when I read that verse, I actually thought, in my life, I have never been tested. Genuinely. Like, my life has been one, perfect journey. It's been completely bliss, alhamdulillah. And, whether it's, I've got, my parents were alive, doing well in my career, never had any issues there, whether it was family, whether it was having a nice car, nice house, being able to go on holiday. There was nothing really that I could say, oh, I haven't got this. Everything seemed to be going well. So reading that verse either meant if you're not a believer, you may not be tested. But God is saying in the verse in that Quran that, do you think it will be sufficient for you to say that I believe and that I'm a believer? So that means that if you genuinely are a believer, you will be tested in some shape or form. Loss of health, wealth, or your children, or some other form. And I'd like to think that I believe. And so I'd like to think that, well, I'd not like to think, the verse is sort of saying we will test you. So I always have that fear, if I'm honest, in the back of my mind, which is to say, we will be tested. We've been promised that. And it's how we respond in those tests. And so if we start getting arrogant and overconfident now and saying, I've made it and I'm so successful, Allah could test us in so many ways and humble us to say, well, I'm just going to bring you back down to earth, because everything is out of our control. We do not know what we're going to eat tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be alive tomorrow. Everything is predetermined. God knows what's going to happen to us. So if we do not even have the ability to know what I'm going to eat for my next meal, or whether I'm going to be able to live tomorrow, how am I supposed to be so arrogant and confident about my achievements? Because everything that has been given to me because of circumstances. Because I happen to be born into a family where my parents are the way they are. I happen to have had certain opportunities. So that has always been something that has kept me quite humble, and knowing that we will be tested. And when you look at people of faith, if you look at the times of the Prophet and the other prophets, there is no one who has been tested more than the prophets themselves. So if we say, well, if you're a believer, you're going to have an easy life. No, we're naturally told that the greater iman that you have, the more we're going to test you. So that's something that I think keeps me humble, because I'm fearful of challenges that we will naturally face, that we are promised. But it's about retaining your iman in those difficult times. Because there's another verse in the Quran which I also hold on to, which provides at the same time the comfort, which is, it's in a surah which is Surah Talaq, which is quite ironic because the surah is divorce. And verses 2 and 3 of that surah talk about the fact that if you have faith, if you have trust and show sabr, if you show tawakkul in your creator and you show faith, we will open doors for you that you didn't even know existed. So God is saying to you that we will test you, but we will also, if you show sabr and you show faith and trust, we will then open doors for you that you did not even know existed. And the Prophet had said, peace be upon him, that if there was only one ayah of the Quran, if there was only one verse of the Quran that was revealed to mankind from the entire Quran, and it was this one, that would have been sufficient. That would have sufficed. So that ayah is one that I hold on to, both as hope and a life lesson, which is, we have to show that faith and trust throughout. We have to show that patience. And if we do the unimaginable, he has promised it. He will open doors. And I know from personal experience that is true, because I've experienced it myself. And when you experience something yourself in your own life, in your own journey, it just brings you closer to him. It humbles you, but you also know that this is genuinely the word of God, and he is telling us, giving us this manual, and telling us that this is how you should be leading yourself. So for me, my iman and faith and confidence in my Creator is fundamental to everything that I do, whether in the workplace, whether outside the workplace, and it keeps me, I'd like to say, keeps me grounded, as well as mum telling me off.
And have you faced any challenges when it comes to your own mental health, or any struggles or challenges in your career?
It's anyone who says that they've never faced challenges and everything's been smooth sailing is probably being disingenuous. We all face anxieties. Again, it's nothing to be shy about. This is, again, the Quran talks about, we have created humans, men, anxious. You will worry. That's the nature of humans. And if you look at the greatest of creations, and you look at the life of our Prophet, peace be upon him, did he ever get anxious? Of course he got anxious. Some of the verses and some of the surahs that have been revealed have come down to the Prophet at a time when he was feeling the most anxious. So the idea that men or people should not feel or cannot feel anxious, and that somehow it means that they lack faith, I don't necessarily agree with. And I give the example of, there's a surah towards the end of the Quran, when I read the tafsir, it was very, very powerful and moving, which is Surah Duha, which is when the Prophet had not received revelation for a number of months. This is after he had received revelation in Mount Hira. And he then hadn't received revelation for several months, and people started taunting and teasing him and saying, where's this angel of yours that was bringing you revelation? And the Prophet started having all sorts of anxieties and thoughts in his head. Is Allah upset with me? Have I done something? He was questioning all sorts of things, and the longer the period went, the more he questioned himself, the more he felt that he had done something and God was punishing him. And then after several months, more than 6 months, Surah Duha was revealed. And it was revealed to the Prophet to say, God takes he takes an oath, and he says that we are not upset with you. There's nothing you've done wrong. And Allah tells the Prophet that the next life is better for you than this life, and what we will give you will surely be better than what you've had or have. And it was the biggest consolation that the Prophet could have. But for me, what I took from that was the lesson that even the greatest of creations got anxious and was worried. And Allah came and sent a surah to console him. Surah Kawthar, which is the shortest surah of the Quran, was revealed to the Prophet when his son died, and people were taunting him and teasing him again that his progeny had been cut off, that he had no lineage left, that he would have no sons to carry his name. And Abu Jahal was taunting him. And the shortest surah in the Quran is one of the most powerful surahs in the Quran, because Allah says to the Prophet, relax, don't worry. Your progeny has not been cut off. And he's promising him Kawthar. He's promising him this river in heaven. So I think we have to accept the fact that we as humans, who are far inferior than the greatest of creation and the prophets, will worry, will be anxious, we will question ourselves, we will be insecure, we will have mental anxiety, but we have to build a mechanism to sort of help ourselves through those situations. And again, I go back to the verse 2 and 3 of Surah Talaq, which is have sabr and show faith. And if you do, we'll open up doors for you that you didn't know existed. So for me, that is the ethos by which I sort of would subscribe to.
That was really well answered, that, mashallah. So, for the young entrepreneurs that are listening, how can they get involved with yourself and try and reach out to you and maybe network with you?
So I make it a deliberate decision that if anyone contacts me, I will always try and respond to them. So a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, which is the only social media platform I use, and I try not respond to anyone. So if whatever I can do, even if it's a courtesy email or message back, I try and respond, because I think, look, the thing is that sometimes what we forget is that I go back to something that I heard once, which is character is defined by how you treat someone who has nothing to offer you, as opposed to how you treat someone who has something to offer you. It's very easy for us to give our time and our energy and want to network and spend time with someone that we want to get something from. So he might be a potential client. He might be someone who is very affluent, very wealthy. Of course you want to be seen with this guy and you want to get his time and attention. What about that guy who has nothing to offer you? How you treat him is true character. That reveals who you are, because that person has got nothing to offer you. And I'd like to think that if someone reaches out to me, that it's not someone I will respond to just because I'm looking at a value add. I'm looking at what can this person do for me. And I think we have to, as people of faith, we have to indoctrinate ourselves into that way of thinking. And one of the saddest things, I think, is that sometimes we only will give time of day to people who we think can benefit us. And someone who we don't think has any benefit, we're not going to derive any benefit, we don't give them any time. I remember a really nice story when my dad, he was a taxi driver driving in Leeds many years ago. I was probably about 14 or 15 years old. And he sat there with the then managing partner of a local law firm, a guy called Chris Allen, still a partner, managing partner of Black Solicitors. And his firm was fairly small and in its infancy at that stage. And my dad just said to him, my son, he's at school, he wants to do law. Would you give him some work experience? And Chris pulled out his business card and gave it to my dad there and then and said, get him to drop me an email and he can come and do work experience, sorted, done. He had no reason to do that. There was nothing that I could benefit. And as a 14, 15-year-old kid, I didn't even have the basic sort of skill set to even go and add any value in that law firm. It's not like I'd done a law degree, but I remember that act, and even to this day, when I see Chris, I will always be very grateful for the opportunity he gave to a random taxi driver who he didn't know, who was taking him around some place in Leeds, and he gave him his business card and said, "Yeah, get your son to come and drop me an email and do some work experience." And today we're both partners and we're both operating in Leeds. For me, that's very humbling, and that is, I'd like to think that I'm that sort of guy. If there are people out there who want some advice, want an opportunity, that whatever I can do, there are limitations, of course, but whatever I can do, I can offer in the same way, because that is the mark of a real person. That how you behave with others who are less fortunate or who have less to give you. We're all trying to network with someone at the end of the day. I'll be sat there thinking that these are great clients that I would like to do business with. But for that person, you are that person. And sometimes we forget that, when we're looking at him and thinking, I wish he would give me time of day, but he is looking at you thinking, I wish he would give me. Now, if everyone took the same approach, which is, well, I'm not going to entertain him, why would the guy that I'm trying to network with want to entertain me? Because I'm looking for something from him, his business, he's a client. And it goes back to this idea of what goes around, if you do good, it comes around. And I have seen that so many times in my career, that I've done something for someone, not with any ulterior purpose. 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, that person has said, oh, I mentioned you to someone else, and they would like to talk to you, and you, it's very difficult to even set out and explain some of the network and relationships that you've built over the years because of one good deed or act that you may have done. So I'd like to think that I hopefully subscribe to that ethos, and that if I can help, I will try and help.
MashaAllah, that's incredible. Do you feel like you're living like a Harvey Specter kind of lifestyle? I feel like that's the kind of vibe I get when I'm here, like the
Really?
Harvey Specter kind of. I don't know, have you watched Suits?
I have watched Suits, yeah.
Yeah? What do you think of Harvey Specter?
I think Harvey's very slick, and so. Is this part of the podcast? I've watched Suits. People sometimes ask me the question, is your life like Harvey Specter? Is it like Suits? And again, I think it's what you make of it, to be honest. I think we have a great profession. We work in great buildings. We work on some really amazing cases. So if that means that our life is like Suits, then yeah. But in terms of some of the sensational stuff that happens in Suits, I think I read some statistic that he did something like 16,000 trials over the course of 1 year. That is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
So
sure.
that is completely unrealistic. But there's elements of the way they depict his life and his career that are true and is reflective of the sort of commercial law that we do.
Do you recommend any books?
So for personal self-development, I went on a journey myself personally, and this is just me speaking for myself, that about 10 years ago I decided to read the Quran from start to finish. I'd grown up learning Arabic and reading the Quran in Arabic, but never actually felt the benefit of it, if I'm honest, because it was like learning a different language. It's like learning to read Chinese. But what benefit does it have if you don't actually know what you're reading? So when I got to 2015, 2016, I actually felt like I haven't actually read the Quran. And this is a book that's supposedly the word of God, and it's something that I'm supposed to follow and adhere to, and yet I've never read it. So I took it upon myself to read it from start to finish. And in terms of personal development, in terms of as a book of guidance, it's unparalleled. So many nuggets of wisdom in there, pearls of wisdom that are in there, and it's a book that keeps on giving. It's not the sort of book that you read once and you say, right, I've read it, I've done, I can put it away. It's almost like an onion. You peel it, and there's another layer, and then you peel it, and there's another layer, and every time, and you can just focus on one or two verses, and it can be mind blowing. Some of the times when I've been looking for inspiration, and I randomly just opened the book, the Quran, and said, well, I'm facing a dilemma, and I will say, God, just show me something, and almost always, my eyes will set. My eyes will be set on something that I've read, which is directly relevant to me. And I'm trying to think. I think I was having a conversation with someone, and I'd finished that conversation, and they'd said something, and I opened the book, the Quran, and when I read it, the verses that I was reading were exactly what was relevant to the subject matter that I had been discussing, and I can't remember exactly what. But that's the power of the Quran, and it's how it led so many people to convert as well. I mean, there's a story of Hazrat Umar Farooq when he was hiding behind the Kaaba, and he caught the Prophet reciting the Quran, and when he heard the words, he started thinking to himself, this sounds like the words of some sort of magician or some soothsayer. And the words that the Prophet was reciting were, and they think that these are the words of a soothsayer. Tell them they're not the words of a soothsayer. And then he thought, it's a magician, and they think it's the word of a magician or a poet. They're not the words of a poet or a magician. And so it's a book that almost speaks to you. So from a personal development perspective, that's something that I hold on to. But I think the most life-changing thing for me was actually the life of the Prophet, the seerah. And actually, reading a book like The Sealed Nectar, or I watched the Sheikh Yasir Qadhi series from start to finish, which was phenomenal. It genuinely was one of the best things I'd ever watched. I think it was about 105 episodes, and I watched from start to finish, and I'd recommend people to watch it. It's one of the most educational, informative, but life-changing seerahs that I have seen, watched, experienced. And that would be my recommendation.
MashaAllah. And finally, concluding the podcast, you're from Bradford. We're trying to bring entrepreneurs on from Bradford to really try and showcase the vast array of inspiring individuals that we have on. So I just want your thoughts on Bradford as a city and the kind of stigma that it gets and negativity that it gets online.
Love Bradford, a great city, my home city. I'd like to think I'm an ambassador for Bradford outside of Bradford, so wherever I go, I'm representing. I don't think any of us should feel a stigma or feel embarrassed about the fact that we come from this city. We've got the City of Culture Award, which I was really proud of, but there are so many great values that people in Bradford have. For all the negativity, and it's almost like people will sometimes just focus on one or two isolated incidents and forget the fact that there is so much that is positive in this city. There is a warmth in this city. There's a hospitality that this city has that I feel that no other city has. And I try and say that as objectively as I can. So I'm a very proud Bradfordian. And the amazing thing is that I can be anywhere in the world. I could be in Saudi, or I could be in Dubai or in the US, or on a plane somewhere, and you meet someone, and then you say to them you're from Bradford, and then immediately there's a connection. Like, oh, I went to school, or my friend, or my dad, and there's a connection. And I've never experienced it with any other city, and I've traveled far and wide, I'd like to think, and lived in a number of cities, but there's no other city that I know of where if you randomly bump into someone and they have a connection to the city, the smile on the face, it's almost like there's a glint in their eye, everything lights up. That's saying something. And I don't know of any city, and I say it here in this office, when I meet someone and I tell them I'm from Bradford, it's almost like a wry smile, but also everyone knows there's something special about the city. So I'm very proud, and I think we should be, we certainly shouldn't be shy, because sometimes people think, no, I'm not from Bradford, I'm from Leeds. And we should be proud of the fact that we're from Bradford. It's a great city.
When it comes to somebody like yourself being a partner at the largest law firm in the world, and you've born and brought up in Bradford, that's a huge testimonial to the city, and it's an amazing success story. So we're really happy to have you on the podcast. So I really appreciate you being featured on the show, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to take value from everything we've spoken about. And I just want to conclude on 2 pointers. One is people that want to specifically go into the legal sector, and any advice that you could give them, and just finally any concluding pieces of advice that you could give to all the young entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, so for the legal sector, I'd say if it's something you want to do, research, find out about law firms, go and do some experience, and just try and take in as much as you can so that you're making an informed decision. So go and enjoy it. The whole point is that all of these law firms will have vacation placements, work experience placements, and go in. It's a shop window for you. Go in and experience what it's like being a law firm, and ask yourself, is it something that I can see myself doing? Is it something I will enjoy? Because it's not for everyone. Some people want to be outside, want to be doing, want to be using their hands, and want to be out and about. So go and experience it, research, and then speak to as many people as you can. Find mentors, reach out to them. And then in terms of generally giving advice to people, I think we are, as humans, we are interacting with other humans, and we have to try and leave a positive impact on every other person that we meet. And I think if everyone, when they wake up in the morning, genuinely went out and set about their life to enrich someone else's life, as in, I am going to be a positive influence today on someone else's life, the world would be such a better and happier place. Rather than thinking, I'm going to do this and this is going to cause harm to someone else, or this is me thinking just from my own selfish perspective. If we only thought about it from the perspective of, how can I be a positive impact on someone else, my community, my environment, the world would be a happier and better place and a safer place. And I think for people in Bradford and young people, that's what I would encourage you to do. Whether it's, if you're going out and the way you're driving, or if you're going out for a meal, be courteous to other people. If you're driving on the road, be courteous to others, be mindful of others, enrich their lives so that we leave a positive impression, because we are only defined by our actions. We are only, we're all humans interacting with other humans, and if we, there is so much ill that's going on in the world around us. There's so much disunity and issues going around the world that we should take it upon ourselves to not add to that.
Learned a lot from the episode. You're a really inspirational individual, mashallah. You're a huge credit to Bradford and our community. So thank you very much for being on the podcast. I've learned a lot from you. I'm taking notes. One day, inshallah, I'm going to be as well spoken as you. Inshallah, I'm going to watch the podcast back and take notes on your grammar.
Thank you for inviting me. I've watched your podcast and you're doing a wonderful job. I'm just going to comment. You're probably the best dressed person that I've been interviewed by. So I don't know where you get your suits from.
Hey, Manati Bespoke. We've got to plug that in, yeah.
Sartorial elegance of the highest order. So really nice chatting to you. It's been a pleasure to be here. And if I can be of any value or benefit to any of your audience, then I appreciate that.
Inshallah, we're going to do the day in the life of vlog in your office place and do a little bit more work together collaboratively. Guys, if you like that episode, please like, subscribe, comment. Another exclusive guest. If you've got any questions for him, we're going to do a part 2 soon. So just drop us a message and we'll see you on the next episode.